Hello, everybody. Welcome. Nice to have you with us. I don't know what sort of weather it is offering you outside, but it's pretty dreary and rainy where I'm sitting and looking today. So hopefully you're staying warm. Something good in the day is bringing you energy and light, since there doesn't seem to be much out in the cloudy sky, at least in this part of Oregon. But welcome to all of you around the state joining for office hours. We're 114 strong on this beautiful first day of February, and welcome. I'm joined here by colleagues Scott Nine, Ashley Pickerel, Joanne Edmondson, Michelle Goodness, Alexa Pearson, and Ken Greenbaum. And we're here to provide what's hopefully a helpful hour of some new information, some updates. If we do it right, a little spark of humor, some inspiration, and to learn with you and from you. So if you're just joining us for the first time, office hours are really designed to provide you with clarity and updates, create a space where you can bring questions and ideas, a place to reinforce and anchor us in shared values, and to offer some two-way communication that is a little less scripted and less driven by PowerPoint slides and more by conversation and chat and one another. So just a brief overview for today. Ken and Alexa will be facilitating some of today's office hours. Scott and I will be here as well. And then we've got these amazing three supporters, and Michelle's apology that your name got left off here because you're so important. But Michelle, Ashley, and Joanne will help to keep us moving in the chat, give good information, and are just additional resource for you. So again, these are recorded and available to you. And to the extent that we have capacity, we'll be answering questions in the chat. So a couple of announcements. One, just pretty logistical in nature, but just wanted to make sure everyone knows we will not be hosting office hours on Monday, the 15th of this month in observance of President's Day. It's a holiday for many of us, if not all. So no office hours there. Also, it is National School Counselors Week. So if there is a school counselor in the midst, extend our love and gratitude to you for your service. And if you haven't yet reached out and thanked a school counselor today and you're on the call with us, please be inspired to do so. Two things that we're going to focus on today. One is equitable grading. There's been a lot of conversation and questions around what to do in this moment with grades. For some of our schools, we've heard reports of large number of students that are failing or not yet having success in some of their online or remote learning settings and contexts. And so we have some ways to prompt some good thinking around that conversation. And then we're gonna do something called open chat theme, which if you've been with us for different office hours, you know that that's where we just really open it up and let your questions inform us today. Before I hand it over to Alexa and Dan, I did forget one announcement, and I wanted to make sure that folks knew that on Thursday, the Department of Ed will release our enrollment report, and so I know there's lots of interest in that. So I wanted to make sure that those of you on the call knew that as well. So with that, we'll get started and welcome Alexa and Ken.
Hi, everybody. Ken, myself, and Dan Farley, our Director of Assessment, we had an opportunity to present this at COSA on Friday. So this is just a very high overview of a few slides that we talked about. And if anybody wants more information, I'd be happy to follow up. But as you can see, actually go back to our groundhog. There we go. So, you know, we picked these two images here because when I think about grading conversations, and if you've been in education for a long time, to me, it feels a little bit like Groundhog's Day, which is tomorrow, by the way. So this is a very relevant analogy. But when I first started teaching in the late 90s, and I know that dates me, but after my first year of teaching, started looking at my grade book and realizing that there were inequitable grading practices happening within my classroom. And so And yet, and even though it started changing, got some books, I think many of you, if you've again been in education for a while, you probably remember the Ken O'Connor 15 Fixes to Broken Grades. There's been a lot of work in this area, and yet it's a conversation we continue to revisit without a lot of change. I just talked to my son the other night. He still, his grade was a C in Spanish, and his reason, again, my teacher doesn't take late work. Who knows? That could also be his perception. But I just think that conversation continues and there's a reason it continues. It's because this is the other image that I thought about, was this hornet's nest. And I had to put these little tiny graphics at the bottom because no one knew what those first two images were when I first put them up. But they are, grading is deeply personal to a lot of teachers, their grading practices. It's also, to our parent and our families who have grown up with this grading system that is very deeply embedded within our higher education system, it's embedded throughout our whole system of education. It's very hard to let go and reimagine. There are pockets of places that have done that. And so we want to make sure we want to celebrate those. But even ODE's decision to change to pass, no pass, when we did in the spring guidance, that came with a lot of stings. We had a lot of feedback from that. So we asked the group that we met with just to kind of see what was people's appetite for change. And now you can change to the next slide. We did this on Mentimeter. We just kind of said, asked that same analogy, just how many of you are really ready to poke the hornet's nest and talk about some changes you can make? And we've seen districts doing this. We've seen a couple districts who've decided to have a district policy around no zeros. I know I've just heard about several districts changing their district policy to no Fs. Those are poking the hornet's nest for sure. And there's also ready to remove the hornet's nest. This is a dangerous, we are harming children with this. And so how do we actually really remove this and rethink? So if you look at that, again, this is a small sample size. This was about 20 district representatives responding, but 70% of people have an appetite for this change, and 25% still want to know, I'm ready to read more about this. And so why grading matters. Oh, this is Ken. I want to introduce Ken Greenbaum's here to talk about digital. He's our digital learning director. And so Ken has this slide.
Awesome. Thanks, Alexa. Yeah, so why grading matters now. We wanted to make sure that any conversation we have around grading is really centered in equity. And so this is a quote from some researchers at the School Reform Initiative. I'll just read it briefly here. Schools are a major part of society's institutional processes for maintaining a relatively stable system of inequality. They contribute to these results by active acceptance and utilization of a dominant set of values, norms, and beliefs, which, while appearing to offer opportunities to all, actually support the success of a privileged minority and hinder the efforts and visions of a majority. And so with that, it's important that we acknowledge throughout this discussion of grading, both today and beyond, that many current grading practices are a part of this dominant set of values, norms, and beliefs. And similarly, our values, norms, and beliefs influence our grading practices, and those in turn can either contribute to or dismantle inequitable systems. And kind of the current status, real quick before we dive into informed thinking, there's the research on grading we know over the past century tells us that they are generally inconsistent for lots of different reasons. But given that when that student performance is purely measured or poorly communicated through variable grading practices, we know that the decisions based upon those data aren't appropriate. And so with that, we just want to make sure that we are really grounded in grading as part of a set of values, norms, or beliefs, which are either contributing to or dismantling inequitable systems. Thank you, Alexa. You can go to the next slide now.
So the book that we've been reading, we're reading several different books around this, and I have a couple of different quotes from other authors as well. But The Grading for Equity by Joe Feldman, I feel like is an excellent start on this. It's very digestible. The one around research, Dan loves research, so he got really into the research one and was able to weave that through. But those are two of the books that have informed our thinking. The Joe Feldman one also has a website. You could just look up Grading for Equity, Joe Feldman, and there's some resources that are available right away for those two pieces of text that have helped inform us. With RSSL, we came out with one supplement, which was around addressing grades and credit options, because we also realize the credit option is a huge part of this conversation. If you're in high schools, we know that we heard from a lot of districts around the how many students that we were seeing grades assigned to them that were failing grades, and that students were not earning credits. So we put some pieces in here. If you haven't seen this, there's the link here to the assignments. Maybe someone could put that in the chat too. The addressing grades and credit options. We do have a credit options page. If you have any questions about those, I've been engaging with districts around like, well, would this work? How would this work? And I think it's complicated because you also don't want to completely lower the standard. We want to make sure that children are able to go to the next level, that they're prepared to go to the next level, and they may need longer time to get there. And so how do we not just stop and put the F on the report card and it's over, and continue to engage? And again, Gresham Barlow just recently shared with me their new policy that they put out. And so hopefully we can begin sharing some of these resources as well. And Dan put together some equitable grading quotations. Also, just he kind of pulled out some quotations from some things that he was reading. So this, again, these are pretty high level. We realize that each of these pieces takes a longer time. But if you just wanted to look through to say like, okay, what is our district doing? Or what do I see happening? What equitable grading practices am I starting to see reveal themselves within our school district? Like a very simple one is just that allowing redos and retakes. We've also engaged with teachers around this conversation because we do know that when you do that, you've also now extended that assignment and the teacher workload. So some districts have been really creative in creating time and space for those retakes to happen, whether it's in office hours or flex time. And so if anybody has great ideas, like the wisdom is in the room here, please share within the chat. And then also, and if you have a policy that you've created and someone's in here, put these in the chat because we are looking to collect those. And the biggest one again is that it's fine to switch because you can switch slides, yeah. We pulled 4 actions, and just to be very clear, this is no small task, any one of these. So I put these little suitcases around here because of that. I know the word gets like unpack, gets used way too much in professional learning, but it really is that number 4, that's a giant suitcase to go through. And it's an important one because we really do need to understand formative assessment practices so that we can coach students on their way and not grade them as they're still learning. We grade them after we've coached and practiced with them. And that takes a long time, how to give specific feedback. Number 3, like I said, we are seeing this number 3 happen. We're seeing districts take action, not just at like, Miss Smith in room 4 does this, but that as a district coming up with a policy to say, we are no longer putting Fs on report cards because we know what that does. So that's a really exciting change that we are seeing. And if there's nothing else, that the 0, it is just hard. It is nearly impossible to crawl your way out of a 0. And so if anybody wants more information on the mathematical inaccuracies of grades, we would be happy to share that one-on-one. Just like put your name in the chat and we will contact you because it's truly a huge issue. And so the part over here around, I just wanted to make sure too that people know, again, not a quick fix, all the things I'm saying. And I also realized today a lot of people are here because they want to know, like, what are we doing around, I want to hear more things on the vaccine and things like that. So I appreciate just taking a pause. I always want to be in an instructional world here. But Cornelius Minor, if you're on Twitter, if you're on anything, he is a wonderful person to follow. He talks a lot about this, and he does talk about, if you think of grading as the output, if we're not having anti-racist practices within our classroom and equitable practices within our classroom, the grades are also going to reflect that. So when I say this isn't a small task, like we can change some things on the end, but this is a larger conversation that we need to continue to have. And then also Bettina Love, Dr. Bettina Love, who writes, she did that we want to do more than survive, abolitionist teaching. We are looking for who are the co-conspirators in your district and on your school board and your students who can help you really look at this conversation and do this with you. I think we did this one. Okay. Ken, I think we missed your slide. There's a really good slide of why now, but I don't see it in here. So maybe
It's
you
all
can just
good.
speak to it.
Yeah, the only piece I would add is we did a lot of deep thinking about knowing that this inequitable grading has, it's the Groundhog Day. It has come up in the past. It is not just because of the current public health crisis, but why is it front and center now? And sometimes, as Alexa alluded to, there are certainly like technical solutions, right? But there's also kind of deeper learning change management that is really going to bring about that change. And so it's helpful to think about what are the root causes of this current moment that we can explore and think about, so that moving forward, we can really gain momentum around the change management that usually goes into something such as this. And we were just kind of reflecting on the nature of technology, of things being very binary. If I'm a teacher in a virtual space, participation, effort, those type of elements, behavior become very binary, and those can perhaps really add to this kind of light being shined on inequitable grading practices now, that we can really think about moving forward. How are learning management systems help set up to both promote or not equitable grading practices, so on and so forth. So that was kind of what that slide was referring to, just to really think about what's the deeper kind of self-learning and organizational learning that needs to happen around this moment, and also kind of the historical nature of grading or inequitable grading practices.
And so we're excited to continue this conversation. We've had a couple like small pockets of conversation, and now we're realizing, okay, we want this to be a bigger conversation. So we are probably going to look at meeting with a small planning team, and hopefully you'll see more coming to us around some type of grading summit. So if you have interest, please, again, reach out to me. I'll put my information in the chat as well. And these are just some resources that we pulled. You're welcome to use. If you have additional resources, put them in there. The one, the anti-racist grading starts with you, is that piece around Cornelius Minor, his interview with ASCD. So there's also a couple of short videos in there. And we just really thank you for taking a pause to talk about what's happening in classrooms. And we know this is a big conversation. And I'm right now navigating I have a senior in college, and I'm watching or not senior in college, she's applying to colleges. And so is her boyfriend. They come from a very different backgrounds, and just watching this play out and seeing what this means. And so it's a personal piece as well. And I just want to thank you again. So that's all, unless you have questions.
Thank you so much, Ken and Alexa. There's been a lot of interest in this topic, and so Ken, Alexa, and Dan are actually creating a webinar from their COSA presentation on Friday that got lots of buzz and interest. And so, Lynn, to answer your question, yes, we'll of course share the slide deck, and there'll be a much more extensive webinar on this topic for folks to share and learn from, and to make it their own. A couple other things that I wanted to name, just appreciation. There's been a couple of you, I know I'm tracking Summer as well as Dandy, people that are like interested potentially in further conversations. So Ken and Alexa will reach out to you. And in addition to that, just appreciation for the energy and the spirit of sharing, learning with each other, and recommendations of books. So James, thanks for adding your recommendation, and Andrea seconding a recommendation. It's exciting to put some energy in the space about something other than some technical logistical things that can really consume our time. And the last thing I wanted to be sure to name is I've gotten some private chat saying, gosh, it sure would have been nice, ODE, if you would have made some of these things requirements instead of recommendations, because you've created quite a steep hill for us to traverse and climb. And so I appreciate that input. We did do quite a bit of listening and engagement this summer in response to distance learning for all, as we queued forward for setting the course for school year 2021, and heard very strong, very, very clear feedback from people that they wanted grading to remain at the local level, where they could be more responsive to community context and individual district level decisions around how school is going to operationalize. So I just wanted to name that, appreciate the leadership challenge anytime you have to shift a system that's used to doing something in a certain way. We're certainly, hopefully you heard Alexa really naming that and validating what a heavy lift it is to lead for shift and change. And so to the extent we can like pick up that suitcase with you and be on your journey, just know that we stand at the ready for that conversation in any way that we can. Scott, Ken, Alexa, anything to add there before we transition to themes in the chat? Super helpful. Thanks, James, again for adding.
Yeah, I'm just getting caught up with the chat and reading the chat. So yeah.
I know there's some good gold in the chat. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I think I'm really excited to have the conversation. I know a lot of you are, so.
Okay, I think with that, just again, appreciation for making space for what's really important. I know the temptation is to, well, not the temptation, the necessity in many cases is to also balance that with a focus on some of the close-up conversations related to vaccination and RSSL guidance implementation and preparing for a potential shift in blueprint, and all of those things are important. And so thanks so much for engaging and thinking with us about a broader topic this morning. So there's already been a couple of nuggets that we're going to pull from to launch in the chat, and this will feel pretty organic. So it's not going to follow one thread or one theme. It might hop from vaccinations to specific questions about limited in person, and that's its intent. So please continue to pollinate your thinking and questions in the chat, and we'll follow it as we have time for. But Scott, one of the questions that came forward was from a colleague who is very interested in having something clarified about how long do we have to wait in between bringing specific grade level bands back into session. So in other words, this particular district wants to bring all of their K1 students 1 week, and then the next week, all the 2-3 classrooms, the following week, all the 4-5 classrooms. And they're just not sure, can they do that? What's required? Do you have a recommendation? What could you speak to around that?
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone, and also really enjoyable to hear our great ODE colleagues and some of you talking about something other than Ready School Safe Learners, with respect for the importance of our shared work, but very refreshing. So thank you for that. There is not in the advisory metrics process, there is not like, you might remember the version prior to this, there was this like 14-day opening window and details. A version of that was maintained at a kind of recommendation suggestion level, and to talk about why that could be a good idea and how to communicate with families. But context matters, level of plan matters, level of spread in your community matters. And so there's not a firm something that tells you you can or can't come back at any level of kind of grade band. So you can navigate that as you determine best at the local level. We do encourage you to think through that and think through the timing and the communication and its relationship to where there are requirements that come with the advisory metric structure, like the school testing program, but there's no firm anything required in terms of time. One
helpful, Scott.
Yeah, one that I caught from the very beginning that I want to address, and there was a couple versions of it in the spread. I think, Dion, you were asking about the impact of the vaccine as it relates to symptoms, and there was questions about quarantine and quarantine to household members and how that all plays out. So we actually have the draft back from the Oregon Health Authority with their markup of the scenario planning document. We're going to do an engagement with school nurses to run that by them for input. And then after we move through those steps and wrinkle out any additional things, then we will re-up that document to match that change. If you're not following that, the OHA has broadly, bigger than schools, made a determination in what it calls its case investigation guidelines. So basically for local public health, that once someone's been fully vaccinated, 2 doses plus 14 days, then they would not be subject to the quarantine process. There are no one working in Oregon schools, I think, that have probably had that happen yet as a window, given those requirements, but we're adapting the document to match that and its ramifications. So coming soon, maybe the end of this week, probably more likely Tuesday of next week, we'll get that document updated, which we know a lot of people count on as the like, what do I do in XY scenario? So that's coming soon. And covers a few different things. What else you got,
Thank
Jennifer?
you, Scott. There is a question around students that aren't wearing masks. So Bruce brings forward this question, and this is one that we continue to engage with, probably because there's no perfect answer. And when you think about school before COVID, there were many situations actually like this, where there really, it required a lot of adaptive leadership and responding to the children and the situation in the moment. But nevertheless, we will dive into this together and see what we can sense make, Bruce. So Bruce questions reads, on page 31 of RSSL, it names a requirement that students who are unable to wear masks need to be kept separate from other students. How does this apply to busing? And that is, should students wearing masks be on a bus with unmasked students? And then he quotes the specific text.
Yeah, okay, because I was gonna say, like, the way that the first version of that interpretation is not fitting with my, and Bruce, feel free to unmute and we can talk it, is not the way that I understand that. So I'll just briefly summarize the understanding we have, and then Bruce, you can unmute and tell us kind of operationally what you're experiencing as a challenge. So what we've attempted to convey in the refresh guidance is something we thought we had an understanding about prior, but on implementation, we would hear consistent difficulties with, or people feeling like they needed it to be firmer or more discreet. So we have tried to be much clearer around the idea of the difference between a student for reason of accommodation based on disability or for medical reasons, really requiring documentation. If for reasons of disability, we've provided a resource that is linked, my colleagues can put it in there, called Face Coverings and FAPE, that talk about using a kind of manifestation determination process to help determine where an accommodation should be required, to give districts a pathway to think about how to decide when someone wouldn't need to wear a face covering. But because there was a way in which it was feeling very loosely held, like for any reason, people would just go like, well, then you don't have to wear a covering. That was never the intent. And then we've been much clearer. If a student or a family, for a values-based reason, with respect to someone's values, but if for a values-based reason, they don't want to wear a face covering, they then would be offered their opportunity for a public education through CDL. And we avidly feel clear that that's the responsible direction requirement, not an optional phenomenon for schools, hard to operationalize. So many of you have experienced that intention with this developmental view of not punishing little kids and figuring out how to care for their developmental learning to keep a mask on. And they are in some tension. It's no different than any other place where we're trying to create boundaries, whether it's with kids or adults. So where is it that if someone's basically kind of, their mask is coming off their face and you're coaching and reminding and teaching in rhythms and song, versus where someone's kind of always has that face covering down and is consciously choosing not to do it. And we all probably, hopefully, are in this profession because we're able to sort the difference and figure out how to care for both situations and then build ways to respond in those different situations. It is a challenge to think about how to care for busing or transportation. If someone's not wearing a face covering for a values-based reason, they should not, I mean, you would not want to leave a kid out alone in winter without coordination with their family. But the ways of attending to a values-based, I won't put this on, should not put other people at risk. And you'll need to care for that in that level of certainty and situation. If it is for a reason of medical disability, medical or for disability, then you're going to want to think through that. What are the best ways to care for that student's safety? How does that relate to other people's safety? And we cannot write guidance that is kind of for every situation in every context, nor can we be your legal counsel. So we try to give you clear guidance, tools, resources, and then puzzles. And so still happy to kind of puzzle out the specifics if it's helpful to talk it through. But this is the kind of hard work of doing what you all have to move through, you know, on a regular basis. So hopefully that helps in the kind of big picture, and then happy to talk detail.
So I'm specifically, it's very clear if somebody is not, if a student's not wearing a mask because of some reason other than medical, that's really clear. And the option is they can go to CDL. I'm specifically talking about the much more problematic and concerning case of kids who, for medical reasons, maybe they have a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, maybe they have some other condition where it's difficult to breathe or they drool and they can't wear a mask.
Yep.
The guidance says that they should not be with other students, but how does this work in terms of providing an inclusive education? That's a separate question. I'm specifically asking about the bus. You have a situation where you have students without masks. We're obligated to provide FAPE. No question about that. The children deserve an education. What I'm asking is, how do we transport them to school safely without risking them exposing the driver and other students to COVID? And this is even more pressing in light of the new variants, which may be 50% more infectious than before.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And I appreciate both the clarity and the kind of commitment. So one of the things we've talked about quite a bit internally is the real kind of practice reality where like a deep commitment to inclusion as a practice hits this core commitment of health and safety for everybody involved, and where you're wrestling with all of these conditions. And we have sometimes successfully, sometimes less successfully tried to support or work with districts on a kind of case-by-case basis to try to talk through what are the ways to do that. It's one of the hardest, most uncomfortable things to talk about because you have really core values that are equally important and in tension. The same thing is kind of true on the bus, and we can't give you a simple here's what you do answer. So the other than we can offer outside of this call to kind of talk and consult much more specifically about your situation. So I'm happy to get your email or share mine and help try to bridge someone outside of a 186 person consultation. But because the details really matter. So what other transportation's available? What other scheduling possibilities exist? What is the situation with the family? How much risk? How much aspiration? We can sometimes take very specific situations to OHA and they can have really good ideas. So it's very hard to say kind of as a catch-all. But the dilemma that is essentially how do we care for everyone's welfare and accommodate is a real tension, and you know, is essentially like where we all have to puzzle our way through the best way to approach each situation on a case-by-case basis. I know that's not satisfying, but that's kind of the best I can offer. Yeah.
Hey, Scott, Michael Salator over in Malala. Just a follow-up and extension on that, if that's okay. So I get the manifestation piece. That makes a lot of sense. Although it's still, it's still a little clunky. We've gone through several of those processes within our district. We've got students with sensory issues where truly wearing the mask would cause vomiting. and we don't want to cause vomiting. And so this is for limited in person. And so the question is, so I've got probably 3 of these situations where kids are exempt, or we've determined as a team that they can have an exception. And so we're doubling up our PPE on staff, and we're having them in a wider classroom. Now our district is moving to phase in K1 in a couple of weeks. And so the question is, that model that we used around the manifestations and accommodation for students with disability and medical, does that carry when we start to have kids on campus?
Yeah, so again, hard to tell you what to do. I think when you're saying like, how does that carry when more kids come to campus for the students you've originally made the determination for as they interact? It probably requires that you have to think about, it's kind of like I probably should be careful with my words, but I legitimately mean, like, in the same way we think about the least restrictive environment, we're thinking about something principally like that. What is the highest engagement while staying in the least risk, arrangement? And that means questions about staffing, PPE, about that particular student's ability or group of students' abilities to how are they going to attend to space, or depending on developmental age and how much they might put by their own behavior, right? So if you have someone who might be able to not kind of control their behavior actions and put someone at some risk in an immediate setting with no things, then you've got to accommodate differently than you would if it's someone you feel like they're probably going to be able to be in a room and really care for physical distance. So it adds some wrinkles because you're changing the environment when you suddenly add more people, and it's not just about them, it's about the other people. So it definitely would require, like, staffing and working it through. I don't think it's a simple answer. And again, we can't, if you think we're missing a resource that we can provide you from the state level, we will definitely take that feedback and figure out what else we could do to try to do it. It could be also that it's convening more workshop think aloud space for people to share their best thinking with each other. And we can also take that note. But a lot of it's going to just come down to, like, your best staff, your best judgment, your best accommodation, these levels of guidance, and trying to figure out what you think holds these things in tension. There's just not going to be a clean answer on each situation.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Scott, I also think Sarah Green's on the call, and I don't want to put her on the spot at all, but just also, it might be something, Bruce and Michael, where we could work with Sarah Green, who is a new interim assistant superintendent of Office of Enhancing Student Opportunity, to create some kind of roundtables. I know we've had some good luck in doing that with high school principals and educators around grading, for example. Get very different topic, but still nevertheless this notion of the wisdom's in the room and how do we support one another. So I'm hearing, it sounds like you could use some more help thinking through this. So we want to be responsive to you. And I'll work with Sarah to make sure something like that lands.
Yeah, I sent a couple of, sorry, I had a lot of hammering and drilling in the background, so I had to mute. But just wanted to let folks know we are working on, setting up some kind of informal/formal process to help do some troubleshooting. But as Scott and Jennifer and others have articulated, it's unfortunate that we can't directly give specific advice, and we wish we could for every situation and circumstance, because I know that in these times it's sometimes more palatable to be able to say we have to or are required to do X, Y, or Z. But ultimately, we're trying to do inclusion in the best way possible for all kids as often and as frequently as we can, and know that you're all faced with several different barriers, not the least of which is just the transportation piece alone. So know that we're going to be working on that with you, and as closely as possible offering suggestions, but clearly not able to give you the exact solution that may be the most beautiful and elegant that we can find, but we will be giving it our best try at this point. And appreciate if folks want to send me in a direct message your email, we'll put you on a list and we can conduct it that way and get folks invited. Thanks, Jennifer and Scott, for letting me jump in.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, the other thing, looks like there's some additional questions around toileting as well that might be helpful to address, and in addition to the mask piece. So just wanted to name that. Scott, our colleague and friend KT was talking about they're hoping that we could give voice a little bit earlier in our office hours. There was a question related to the performing arts guidance. And so are you able to speak to that at this point?
I'm not quite yet, although KT, if you have news that I don't, I haven't been able to catch up with Colt today yet, and we're checking in tomorrow morning at 7. So I know that there's updated indoor and outdoor recreation guidance. I know that OHA has our prior visual and performing arts supplemental guidance. They're reviewing what we've previously had against that broader governor's advice to deal with the dilemma we talked about on last office hours. And I am not yet briefed on if they've reached a solution and that we're ready to be able to put back up. So if you're farther along than I am on that, that's the best that I know. But I took Friday afternoon off, so I'm trying to catch up very rapidly. So
good for you, Scott. That's awesome.
I know.
We are not farther along than that, but
Okay.
I know that OHA had a document that we created based on some information that we had received about indoor entertainment venues and those kinds of things that they were kind of cobbling together, from ODE performing arts guidance to the OHA guidance, et cetera, et cetera. And so my understanding is OHA is working directly with ODE to get that out as soon as possible, because they do know that it is a
Yeah, good. So I'll frame both of these. I was fairly true, but I'm always nervous when, I'm not totally read back up to things. Michelle, maybe so for both visual and performing arts and for PE, but for different reasons, but a similar phenomenon's happened where we have had guidance for K-12 schools. And then as we move the guidance, as we move the metrics to advisory, we create the conditions where schools can be operating in ways that are different than what the community governor's risk and protection framework are. And that creates a real puzzle. So, you can essentially have situations where people could be doing certain types of things with music or singing in school they can't do in the community, or vice versa. Or you can have a situation where you have the ability to do one thing during the school day, but not after school for activities, or both of those things can be done in school, but not in the community. And that puzzle is essentially trying to get structurally solved for like a further round of alignment between the governor's risk and protection framework and what follows with school. And it's a truly wicked problem, because to build coherence at the school level creates misalignment with community. To match up with community creates some kind of puzzles in the K-12 school world. So we're working really hard in both domains to try to solve that. Thanks, KT.
Absolutely. We really appreciate it. We know that you guys are working really hard on it, and I know our schools and our directors are really anxious to get some guidance on it. So
and there is real exchange going on with lots of drafts and lots of moving parts and lots of perspectives. It's just not landed yet. So, okay.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciation for that. There's some interest in the chat coming privately to me about testing. And so wondering from folks, is there information that we can share or speak to regarding testing? When will those go to schools? How will they be distributed to private schools? What will the expectations be in regard to reporting?
I think we're talking about the COVID school testing program.
Yes.
I'm assuming.
Yeah, sorry, I should have been more clear.
It's okay. I just every once in a while I'm like, well, I don't think it's the other one, but
assessment waiver, SBAC, what are we talking about here?
So first things first. Here's a link to the testing program. I really encourage people to take the time to review the document. It's pretty efficient, I think, in describing the program. And once you get over the mind around a new thing, we think it's pretty low burden and doable. On page 4 is the information about how to get started, as well as a very helpful email address. And they have gotten a great staff person to come coordinate this program, coming to us from DC via Atlanta. and really happy to have the school coordinator there. And then we've been doing a series of trainings. Maybe someone can grab the link to those webinars as well. And we're going to be recording one of them, closed captioning it, and then kind of making it perpetual on the ODE site in case you can't make the training. When you sign up, after you get signed up, then OHA, not ODE, does the actual sending of you of the testing kits. There are details about how they get cared for and what happens in terms of hazardous waste and those kinds of things. But that's really the place to get started and where to follow up with questions. And yes, Jamaica Baker is the human on the other end of that email for the most part, although she's got a small team too, who's doing great. Jennifer, maybe I missed one aspect of the questions you asked, or did I get them all?
There was a question around private schools, and I think for our private school colleagues on the call, they're not necessarily getting clarity in when they're reaching out.
It's the same. I would need more detail about what the barrier is, but otherwise, same program, same steps, same process.
Okay.
So if you've done the reading and you've emailed, I mean, they are, I'm sure, inundated, but I'd say like give it a couple of days, and if it's not, if you have done those things and you are stumped, then let us know at ODE and we can work on the barriers.
All right, it looks like Carol's responded to John as well, and thank you, Carol, for helping. I just like warms my heart when we help each other in the chat. It's pretty tremendous. It looks like Ben has a question here. Can be on page 25 in RSSL. Students can be part of multiple cohorts. This is helpful, Ben. So we are finding that clarifying this again and again is needed and necessary. So we'll talk about this for the group. Does that 100 have to be a bubble that doesn't interact with the other 100s? And this is particular to a large comprehensive high school where each class has 15 students per period that are stable cohorts, but they all get broken up throughout the day. And this is important, Ben, to really think about, particularly as it relates to your ability to stay open and keep kids safe. So Scott, help us think about this again.
We don't use the language of a bubble, Ben, but the concept is absolutely important in terms of within the school day, we talk about them as stable cohort groups. So you have 100 from the student's perspective, 100 total people. That would include the adults they interact with. The only variation on the bubble and the stable cohort is a bubble would be like, it is only those 100 people no matter what. And the stable cohort is the kids are hopefully constant, but the adults can essentially move in other places. So staff are not bound to the total. They count in the 100, but they're not limited to the 100. But otherwise, that is the max constraint. Now, again, remember, I know that this is a real difficult point for people, but the recommended cohort is 24 to 36. And I know that for high school folks, that creates tremendous scheduling challenges. And what we've learned over and over and over again is that if, and hopefully it won't happen, you were to have a real set of cases in your school, that cohort size has a tremendous impact on how you are able to respond. And so rather than trying to kind of design to the max, we would encourage you to bring it down as much as you can with some creative scheduling. A lot of folks have gone to 4x4 schedules or have done interesting things, staggering weeks in scheduling, but practice would suggest for folks who've been in school that you really want to stay away from maxing out. But that's the intention of it. So it's not a pure bubble, but it is definitely intense. It's not, otherwise, if it's like you can, any kid in any mismatched order, you might as well not have it. Like it wouldn't even exist as a structure. So that's the intention.
So just to clarify, is it like if I took one kid and we had a positive case and I drew a circle around them, that's their 100 kids maximum, but.
You got to count the adults in the 100.
Correct, yeah. But that kid, and again, the ABC quarantine model, right? That kid could be in the kids in that circle could be a part of another group of 100. So the bubbles do not, or the cohort groups can overlap, but
No.
not the cohorts. Okay.
No,
So the cohort group has to be 100, and that must be isolated from any
Yes.
other students. Okay.
teachers teaching different subjects could come in and rotate through that group, but that group itself should not break out into other groups. Otherwise, if you break it out, then again, it defeats the purpose.
And Scott, Wendy's wanting to add to that question by saying, do school-sponsored sports contribute to that
No.
cohort of 100?
They don't, as long as they're after school. And again, this is an area that does get a little where people go like, well, wait a second, you just got me convinced why that makes sense. And then you go after school and you say those cohorts don't count for athletics or something. And the way that we've talked that through, and if I think we might have OHA colleagues on the phone, so they're certainly more expert than I am, is essentially you're trying to mitigate risk and you're trying to define locality at a given moment in time, so that if you do have some type of exposure, you're able to work with that defined body to be able to go figure out how you do contact tracing, and you're trying to minimize the number of times you have to do that, but it's not perfect. So transportation in the morning does not count. It's its own thing. You have the school day, which is discrete and set, and then you have after school activities and athletics, which has its own limits, but doesn't count. And that at least gives you kind of like arenas to engage with when you actually have a case and how you work with public health through that case. But it is a little mind bending because it's not purist. You got to think like an epidemiologist. It's like mitigating risk. It's not perfection. It's just better than other options.
And Ben, all that to say too, we're not underscoring, we recognize the challenge of operationalizing within a large high school and honoring that 100 size for the end size for cohorts. So please know that everything we said is rests upon the foundation that we recognize that is no easy task to pull off. And we have heard repeatedly from our colleagues in secondary spaces just how challenging it is to pull off. I do think there's been some innovative thinking about how to come alongside this challenge, but would just want to honor, like, if you're just diving into it, please know it's challenging, and we believe that parameter will allow maximum, if you're able and if you decide to have kids on site. The notion is it allows for optimum, sustainability of on-site learning without disruption. So, again, as Scott beautifully named, it's imperfect.
Super well said, Jennifer. And then one other little thing that I didn't say, but from a designing perspective, you have a different variable which might be more successful, which is an OHA recognized early on, which is like you want that definition for a week, but you can change it. Now, I don't know that everyone logistically would rearrange school every week, but you might very well succeed with every 3 or 4 weeks. So where you're struggling with one flexible variable around how you organize, use time instead of the rotation of people. And many schools who have had the experience of a few cases and have had to really think through this being a real firm parameter, that's the part where you have a little more flexibility. So you can change that 100-person makeup on a weekly basis. So just to help as you're thinking it through. All right.
All right, just wanted to echo for Nancy, making sure you heard transportation is not included in that stable cohort of 100. Ben, absolutely. I know you've been at this since August, so I know you've got good colleagues you're thinking with around this, and certainly lots of people I know in my life are struggling through the same thing. So we realize that the challenge is rich and very real. Scott, I want to, we've got 5 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we give an opportunity for people to think about what they'd like to hear more of next time. I know for sure we will go over and sort of highlight some enrollment data trend. As I said earlier in the call, ODE will publish our February enrollment data report, which has a little bit more, I think people will be reading it with a little bit more level of interest this year than typical years. So we certainly will highlight that next Monday, but want to also hear from you if there are any other points of interest that you would really like to hear us talk about. We're very interested in being responsive to you in the framing and the planning for this time together. I'm also getting questions, Scott, that another RSSL revision is coming out this week. And that is not accurate from everything that I know, but news changes fast. So Scott,
I saw it in the chat earlier and I was like, what?
I'm pretty
Well,
sure.
then I was like, well, okay, look, if you talk about like the family of guidance, then the update to scenario planning and the clarification on PE and visual performing arts technically are guidance and technically are within RSSL, and we'd love to get them out by the end of the week, but probably next. But if you talk about like the big document 5.5, it is not changing this week. There is no, well, like, please, not that I know of, and I would know, but you never, don't jinx anything.
So there'll be,
nothing in the
Tanya, there'll
works.
be a distant cousin fourth removed
Yeah.
on the RSSL family tree that'll come out this week, but no big RSSL headline news. But thanks for that question. It's always, all sorts of things swirl around us and we get wind of things, and some of them have legs, some of them have truth and some of them don't. So appreciation for having the courage to check things out in the chat with us. I really
Just notice the blood pressure though. Like my whole body reacted, but no, definitely worth the ground checking.
All right, and Jen is asking for some guidance around library routines, so that's really helpful input. And looks like Nancy has a question about a student on the bus. I'm just wanting to make sure that we've attended to all questions, and that one we haven't addressed, so we have a couple minutes left. So Scott, for our friend Nancy joining us on the iPhone, if a student on the bus tests positive, then those within 6 feet would need to quarantine, correct? So question about if transportation is not considered part of the of the stable cohort, how do you address quarantine, which is a great question.
Yeah, so it's like simple and complicated. So
everybody write that down. It's simple and complicated. That's the tagline.
So the simple part is that the bus, it is essentially a cohort, and for most of the time, if someone were to be a presumptive or confirmed case on the bus, the action would be either to quarantine the whole bus. That would be the simple part, like blanket quarantine. But sometimes working with local public health, large bus, lots of distance, high ventilation, less than 15 minutes. So the definition of the exposure is kind of 15 minutes, right? Over the course of a day, what's the fancy word we use? It's someone will unmute and tell me. It's like counting.
Cumulative.
Cumulative, thank you. I lost the vocabulary. Cumulative 15 minutes, so not just 15 minutes in one setting, but 8 minutes in one part of the day and 7 in another. So if you have that kind of support in place and you could rule it out, it's possible that you wouldn't necessarily have to quarantine the whole bus. But again, all kinds of variables, someone's like, so the details matter. So simple, generally, yes, scenario planning document covers the situation in quite a bit of detail, depending on your local public health, amount of capacity you have, range of different outcomes. So, but right train of thought to think generally yes, and then work from there for more nuance.
All right, thank you, Scott. We're gonna call that a wrap for our February 1st RSSL office hours. Big gratitude and appreciation to all of you for tuning in and joining us today, for bringing your questions and your enthusiasm, your spirit of sharing. And most of all, thanks for your enduring leadership every day. It's really impressive. I know I was talking to a colleague out in the world and they were saying, I don't know what it is, but I've just been having a hard time like finding the spark. And I was like, well, go find a kid. Go find a kid either in your own house or somewhere in your sphere, and check in with them, because that will light you right back up. So just big appreciation for all of you, and we'll see you in 7 days at the next RSSL hours. Thanks so much. Take good care.